Alrighty. Hello. Welcome, welcome. It is Friday today, which is the day that I'm filming this. So happy Friday to everybody. So I am going to go ahead and we're going to crack on through. We are reading the Enola Holmes mystery, The Case of the Gypsy Goodbye, which is book 6 of 6 in this series. And this is part 3, so this is the final round, the last stream, the last video. This is the end. Excuse me, I'm opening my drink. So I am excited to get through this book. For one, because I've never actually finished this book. I've never read this book. This is completely blind for me. And I just enjoy it. So I'm happy to kind of get this milestone finished and get, on to another project. I think I'll figure out what that is by the end of this stream and let you know. So we're gonna get going. Where we last left Enola. Oh, which, by the way, I gotta do my final shout out to the Nashville Public Library, because this book was discarded. Sorry, let me straighten that out for you. There you go. Discarded from the Nashville Public Library, Nashville, Tennessee, and Davidson County. So thank you, Nashville. Appreciate it. Glad to have this book. So where we last left Enola, she was trying to figure out where the Duchessa had been kidnapped and taken to. She found her clothes, she found a handkerchief, and she's trying to figure out, like, where the heck could she be? I don't know, but she's trying to ascertain the help of her dear friend, Reginald, the collie, to use his nose to see if he can sniff out the Duchessa. And unfortunately, in order to do that, she has to also get the help of her brother, Sherlock Holmes. And Sherlock has just told her that, he has come to terms. He does not want to send her to boarding school or finishing school. But if he's going to help with Reginald to find the Duchessa, then Mycroft has to come along too. So that is where we have left off. And I'm going to take a drink. I am not a sponsor, but I do recommend. I wish I was a sponsor. LaCroix, you can sponsor me anytime you want. Alright, here we go. Chapter the 15th. Nothing could have surprised me more, or pleased me less. Levitated from my seat by shock, I stood aghast. Mycroft? But why? There is no time to explain, Enola. Sherlock seized his top hat, kid gloves, and stick. Do you agree? How can I? He has the legal right to force me. I shall give you my word of honor as a gentleman that I shall prevent him from attempting to capture or coerce you in any way. You will not let him lay hands on me? I promise you, I will not. Sherlock's word was inviolate. Inviolate, which means it can't be violated. I'm guessing. Also, I knew that I could easily outrun Mycroft should anything go amiss, but still, I have a niggling feeling, I told Sherlock, that this is one of your tricks. So it is. The corners of his mouth twitched in a puckish smile most incongruous on his distinguished face. On Mycroft. Oh! This information, of course, made it perfectly all right, and my curiosity utterly trumped my caution. Very well, then. I rubbed Reginald Colley's head goodbye. Let us go at once. I'm sorry. My recap was mistaken. They're going to get Toby to sniff out the Duchessa, not Reginald, because he's only a collie, he's not a bloodhound. But Toby is apparently a better tracker. Toby, just as Watson had described him, was a spaniel of sorts, with long brown and white hair, but nothing else to recommend him by way of beauty. We left the dog in the cab. Sherlock had ordered a four-wheeler. What Sherlock wanted, Sherlock got, which waited for us whilst we went into Mycroft's club to fetch him. At this twilight time of day, it seemed, Mycroft was quite certainly in his club. He varied no more from his orbit to work, club, and lodgings than the sun varied in its rising and setting. As a female, even as the lovely Viola Everso, in a delicately yellow gown, necessarily I waited in the antechamber, and Sherlock waited with me, whilst a senior servant, as this might be no small task, went in to fetch Mycroft. Several minutes passed before that scowling individual appeared. Meanwhile, Sherlock produced my card from his shirt pocket and passed it back to me. Play your part, Miss Viola Everso. Oh-ho! Sherlock wanted to see how long it would take for Mycroft to recognize me. I held my carpet bag in front of me with both gloved hands, tilted my head downward, and settled my face in a simpering expression. When Mycroft burst forth, resplendent in white tie, expansive royal blue waistcoat, and cutaway jacket, he did not even glance at me. Sherlock, he barked, irate, you know I despise being disturbed at my— Quite necessary, I assure you, dear brother. Sherlock interrupted in tones so suave they smothered Mycroft's ire like sugar icing poured onto a hot cinnamon bun. Mycroft Holmes, allow me to present to Miss Viola Everso. Mycroft turned to me with the scantest of bows, and I handed him my card. Very pleased, I'm sure. Very pleased, I'm sure, he said, sounding not pleased at all. Miss Everso requires my assistance, said Sherlock, and that of another able-bodied man. As Watson is unavailable, I came to you. Able-bodied! Mycroft roared as if he had been insulted. Oh, please, Mr. Holmes, I warbled to Mycroft in my most dulcet soprano. Surely you cannot refuse to assist a lady in distress. His mouth opened, but no reply was forthcoming. Rather, he looked as if he had eaten something that disagreed with him. Come, come, Mycroft, chided Sherlock. It will be for only a few hours, and I have a cab waiting. Hearing his cue, the astute servant appeared with Mycroft's capacious coat and slipped it onto him. One perhaps ought to explain that proper dress knows no season. Even in the heat of summer, a gentleman in evening dress will wear his coat, just as a gentlewoman must wear her bonnet and gloves. Sherlock took Mycroft's hat, etc., for him, immediately maneuvering his stately brother out to the door, whilst I slipped out likewise. "Where to, Miss Everso?" he asked me as we neared the cab. "Kipple Street at St. Tooking's Lane," I murmured, as if I myself were incapable of calling our destination to the cabby. Sherlock did so. "The East End, with a dog yet?" Mycroft complained, already in the cab, taking care to seat himself in the opposite corner from Toby. Meanwhile, Sherlock gave me his hand and helped me up the step as carefully as if I were made of Waterford crystal. Feigning a ladylike repugnance towards poor Toby, I sat next to Mycroft, where he would be sure to whiff my expensive lily and lavender scent. Sherlock lounged in the opposite seat, stroking the dog and saying nothing, as the cab rolled off with no more than the usual degree of jostling. The silence lasted for some time, until seemingly either curiosity, nerves, or my perfume got the better of Mycroft. He swung his impressive head towards me. "What, may I ask, is the nature of your difficulty, Miss, I merely ducked my head and smiled. "Everso," volunteered Sherlock from the opposite seat. "Miss Viola Everso, whose parents were great friends of our mum." "Which reminds me," Mycroft leaned across the cab towards his brother, "have you heard from Enola regarding that communication of which you told me?" "Not yet." "Confound it, Sherlock, I wish you had consulted me before entrusting any such missive to that barbarous, I think half-barbarous, like barbarian, half-barbarous scarecrow scamp." Sherlock glanced at me with an unmistakable twinkle in his eye. Mycroft ranted on. "Our uncouth sister, all mischief, like a rascally terrier pup, barely housebroken." I could resist no longer. Now, I said, in my normal and alas quite distinctive voice, "surely she is at least partially housebroken, and no more rascally, uncouth, or half-barbarous than other members of her family have sometimes showed themselves to be." As if he were a bellows, all the air seemed to exit Mycroft suddenly as he turned to gawk at me. "For instance, by speaking of such delicate family matters in the presence of a complete stranger," I concluded serenely, fully aware of my gypsy bonnet at its fetching angle, my lovely pearl earrings, my ruffled collar starched to perfection. I gave him my most demure smile for a moment before I broke into a less ladylike grin. "Enola?" gasped Mycroft. "Yours truly, my dear brother." "Enola! But I never! What? How? Where in the name of—" But at that moment the cab stopped, and the cabby bawled in a bored tone, "Kipple Street." That's the end of chapter 15. Alrighty, well, since nobody's watching live, I'll just keep going. Chapter the 16th. Hopping out with my carpet-bag in hand, I opened it while Sherlock paid for the cab and sent it trotting off. Mycroft stood like a stump as I handed him the lantern and some matches. Having planned only for the company of one brother, not two, I kept the other lantern for myself. Sherlock was carrying his heaviest walking stick, an excellent weapon. As he was managing Toby, I handed him Duchessa del Campo's handkerchief, then stuffed my gypsy bonnet along with my gloves and my expensive wig into the carpet-bag, and covered my beacon of a yellow dress with a light-weight black cloak I had brought along for that purpose. Uniformly drab now, with my swamp-colored hair in an untidy bun atop my head, I turned to my elder brother with a smile. "Now, Mycroft, do I look more like your very own renegade sister?" As an afterthought, I peeled my little birthmark off my face and tossed it into the carpet-bag. Mycroft seemed speechless, an unusual condition for him. "So, Enola, where to start?" Sherlock asked me. "Down along the Thames." Carpet-bag in one hand and lantern in the other, I led the way in that direction. "It seems to me," I explained, "that they would have brought her out of the underground by one of the old sewers that the mudlarks and toshers use." "Her!" Explosively Mycroft regained his power of speech. "Whom?" "Duchessa Blanchefleur del Campo," Sherlock enlightened him. "Enola, you think after robbing her of her finery they would have returned her to the ditches and docks?" "I don't know, but certainly they could not keep her in the shop, could they?" "Hardly." Something in Sherlock's tone made me think he took our search none too seriously, but was thoroughly enjoying himself. I, on the other hand, whilst amused by Mycroft's discomfiture, felt most determined to find the Duchessa. Treading softly, silent and art, I took us downhill, traversing a spiderweb of lanes that led to the river, although truth to tell, so pretty a word as river gives the wrong picture of the Thames. which was more like stinking brown sewer that swelled or sank with the ocean tides. The brackish, sludgy water concealed drowned rats, dead cats, and occasionally decomposing human bodies. The banks were a rotting place where reptilian forms of humanity dwelt. Heading down a steep, dark alley between buildings that smelled of tar, I hesitated, hearkening to a remembered fear. Sure enough, ahead we could see the vertical lines of ships' masts against the lighter gloom of a low sky, and we emerged from the alley to a cluster on a rickety, rocking dock at the edge of the Thames. Standing still for a moment, we all listened, and looked, to the extent of our lantern's glow, for danger. "I have been here before," I whispered. "When?" Sherlock asked, keeping his voice low. "My first night in London." In less time than it takes to say, I remembered those terrible hours held captive along with Lord Tewkesbury in the hull of a boat, my hands and feet tied, my wrists bloodied as I contrived to rub their bindings against one of the steel stays in my slashed corset. Then the fight for freedom, and then the running through the night, slowed by poor Tukey with his sore, bare feet. "What are you talking about?" Mycroft grumbled. "I ran afoul of cutthroats hereabouts. How very comforting." "This way," I whispered, turning randomly to my right, fleeing the memory. All along the shore loomed dark warehouses, visible only because of glaring gas brackets of corner taverns. Slimy, uneven footing ran along the river's edge. A villainous place. Just the sort of place where Mrs. Culhane and her thuggish friends might dump the unfortunate Duchessa. "Let us see what Toby can do with the handkerchief, Sherlock." One of the things that I liked best about Sherlock was that his way with dogs and horses. Regarding Toby, he stopped where he was and crouched to confer with him, caressing and cajoling interest into him before he pulled the square of fine lace-edged linen from his pocket and presented its center to the dog's nostrils. When Toby had sniffed thoroughly, Sherlock arose and clipped a very long leash to the shorter one, giving him freedom. With an odd, waddling gait, the dog trotted into the night, out of sight of our lanterns. "Well, at least he's not leading us to you, Enola," Sherlock remarked as we followed the leash. "Your scent is on that handkerchief, you know." "Yes, and yours, and Mrs. Culhane's. Confound it, Enola, there is something about your presence that hampers my mental faculties." "Oh, wait. Oh, no. This is Sherlock, I'm sorry." "Yes, and yours, and Mrs. Culhane's. Confound it, Enola, there is something about your presence that hampers my mental faculties. We should have stopped at the Duque del Campo's residence and asked for something more redolent of the Duchess's scent, and hers alone." "And what do you think they would have given her? Given you her unlaundered drawers?" "Enola!" Mycroft protested in crimson tones, for I had just mentioned unmentionables in his male presence. I ignored him, badgering Sherlock. "For what purpose could you say you wanted such a personal item?" "Explanation would have stirred up false hopes and entirely too many questions," he replied with a sigh. "You are quite right, Enola. Still it will be a wonder if Toby does not take us to Mrs. Culhane's shop." "It will be more than a wonder, nearly a miracle if he finds anything to help us," I admitted. "But one must try." "And I?" came a grumpy voice from the rear. "For what reason am I really here, Sherlock? Pray tell." "All will become plain, my dear brother. All will become plain." It's the end of chapter 16. Just making sure we're on track. Chapter the 17th. Several hours later, this blessed clarity had not yet occurred. With the characteristic, willing optimism of canines, Toby led us stumbling along the littered, uneven edge of the Thames, hauling us into every conceivable gutter, stream, undercut, and sewer mouth, but without satisfactory results. Indeed, he ended up leading us back the way we had come, towards the dockyard upon which centered my evil memories. Only Mycroft's wheezing, I am sure, for he was unaccustomed to physical exercises, kept him from complaining as we neared a tunnel, actually a dried-up riverbed we had passed once before. Toby alerted, but with his head in the air, not with his nose to the ground. Other than that, I cannot explain my instant alarm, although life on the streets does endow one with a certain warning sensitivity. "Into the tunnel!" I whispered most vehemently, grasping each of my brothers by an elbow and propelling them thither. "Lanterns out!" There was no need to inquire regarding the dog, for as we stood close together in dense shadow, I felt Toby sitting on my feet, his furred body stiff, apprehensive. There was no need to caution anyone to complete silence, except that I crouched to place a warning hand around Toby's snout. We heard footsteps shuffling up the river bank, from the direction of the docks, and voices. Someone was approaching. In a moment I heard two voices, one high-pitched and squeaky, and the other deeper and huskier, with the phlegm of age in it, but still a woman? And why did I think the squeaky soprano was a man? Both of them sounded familiar to me, although I could not place them. Especially not as the deeper voice shook me nearly witless by rapidly and angrily saying several exceedingly wicked words. "'Ad me bellyful of her," it concluded. "And she of you, I reckon," retorted the squeaky voice. "Then why in blazes don't she go away?" I paraphrase, blazes being a euphemism in consideration of the sensibilities of the gentle reader. "Every time I come out of my own house, there she is, just laying like a fish in the filth of the mews." "Well, fair enough, for you put her there, didn't you?" interrupted Squeaky. Squeaky! I nearly squeaked myself as I recognized the rattle-like tones of the vicious little cutthroat who might have killed me last summer. "That's got nothing to do with it, you!" And oaths fit to char my ears interrupted my unpleasant memories. I would not have thought that any female could curse so, not even— The two of them hove into view, rounding a bend on the riverside path, the larger, rather tortoise-shaped one carrying a lantern. Not even Mrs. Culhane. For unmistakably it was Mrs. Culhane, with the villainous Squeaky at her elbow. "It is she," I hissed into Sherlock's ear, fervidly hoping he understood, for I dared say no more. Shuddering, I cringed deeper into the shadows. Mycroft had managed to quell his wheezing, thank goodness. He and Sherlock kept perfect silence as the two villains trod nearer. "She has the whole neighborhood talking and—" "She has the whole neighborhood talking, and damn all if word gets to the police," said Mrs. Culhane, in conclusion to her ranting. The gentle reader will understand that I euphemized the few words fit to repeat. "The damn confounded troublemaker staying around and playing pitiful instead of running home like she oughter." By this time they were walking nearly in front of our hiding place. I thought of the dagger sheathed in the busk of my corset, mentally preparing myself, for if one of them happened to glance our way as the light of our lanterns fell on us, I would need to pull it out quite quickly. "So, what d'you want me to do about her?" asked Squeaky. "Why get rid of her?" "Ow! Do you mean plop her somewhere else, like, or do you want me to do for her?" Kill her, he meant, and his offhand willingness made my neck hair prickle. Luckily, it also made Mrs. Culhane look straight at him, and only at him, as the two of them passed our hiding place and he was looking at her. "Do what you like," she told him. "I don't care. I don't want to know nothing about it. Just get rid of her." "After them," I whispered, once the evil twosome had passed our refuge. Indeed, Sherlock was already creeping forward. He wore the softest of kid boots, always, and possessed a cat-like grace upon his feet. I did not fear they would hear him. I did, however, fear that they might hear me, for such situations seems to bring out the worst of my clumsiness. I gave Sherlock a good start before I followed, holding Toby's leash but leaving my lantern behind in case it might bang or rattle. Mycroft, taking his cues from me, amazingly, did the same thing, trailing me at a discreet distance and treading, I am sure, most carefully, for our only light was that of London's gas lamps hazily reflected from the low clouds, plus Mrs. Culhane's lantern far ahead. Thus, in dim, stealthy procession, we trailed along the Thames for a short distance before veering away from it, uphill, towards the very place where we had started. That is to say, Kipple Street. Long before we got there, I had guessed where we were going. I knew the mews behind Mrs. Culhane's shop from that same exceedingly unpleasant day, the summer before, when I had fled past the cow's shed, the donkey's ramshackle stable, the goat pen, and through a squawking, honking morass of hen and goose in my desperation to escape from Squeaky and his even more fearsome cutthroat companion. But first came Kipple Street, intermittently illuminated by the few street lamps which remained unbroken. Reaching the pavement, rather than stepping out into the gaslight, Sherlock stopped in the shadow of the corner building to wait for me. And I suppose Mycroft. But in my haste I had no thought for my stout trailing brother. Peeping around the corner of the building, I watched Squeaky and Mrs. Culhane turn, a caricature of a promenading couple, into St. Tooking's Lane. I knew how to cut them off. I know how to cut them off! Come! I panted to Sherlock, and with the dog by my side I darted straight across Kipple Street to the alley that led directly to the mews. Behind me I heard someone, I think Mycroft, expostulate. "Disgusting! Has the girl gone mad?" For as is the nature of such alleys, this one was strewn with the odoriferous dung of all the domesticated animals aforementioned, and many more. A most undesirable place to slip and fall. I tried not to do so as I ran forward into what would have been nothing but stench and darkness, if it were not for a glimmer of lantern light approaching from St. Tokine's Lane. Mrs. Culhane. I failed to complete the thought that she and her consort had taken the slightly longer way of better footing. I gasped. In the faint light I could see a pale something, or someone, for it seemed to be a human personage recumbent in the muck. Motionless. Indeed, as still and pallid as a shrouded corpse. Dear God, if it was Blanchefleur, frail filament of womanhood. Was she yet alive? That's the end of chapter 17. Excuse me. Alrighty. Pressing on. We only have 20, we only have 3 more chapters, and then we're finished. Chapter the 18th. I could not tell. Not even as, a moment later, Mrs. Culhane and her murderous companion walked into sight, then halted to stand over her. Not even as the light of their lantern fell full upon her could I discern any motion. Running towards them, my footfalls muffled by the most unspeakable muck. I tried to hold my breath and listen, but I was not yet near enough. I could not hear what they said, but I saw Mrs. Culhane set down the lantern, turn, and leave at her usual waddling gait. I saw that the form on the ground, whether alive or dead, was a woman, unusually slender, clad in nothing but a chemise. I saw her move slightly as if attempting to lift her head. Alive! And I saw Squeaky draw his knife to kill her. No! I shrieked, dropping Toby's leash to free my hands, increasing my already reckless speed to sprint towards him. Stop! Rapidly closing in on him, yet I was not near enough to restrain him by any means other than my voice. Murder! Police! And as he jerked around, quite startled, to look for the source of the commotion, I threw my carpet-bag, for lack of any better weapon. I hurled it with desperate force at his head. He ducked, and it missed, of course, but it gave me enough time to come face to face with him with my dagger drawn. His lip drew back in a mongrel dog snarl as we crouched, blades menacing, shuffling our feet in a slow circle. He recognized me. You again? You're dead, he said. Help, implored a faint voice from the ground. Please help me. The distraction very nearly did me. As I glanced downward, Squeaky struck. Too late I attempted to parry. The cutthroat's knife flashed towards my undefended neck, but at the crucial instant a walking stick descended with great force upon Squeaky's hand, and he cried out as his weapon dropped from his fingers. Within the next moment Sherlock had a firm hold of the puny villain, twisting both of his arms behind his back. I opened my mouth to thank my brother, but there was no opportunity, for just then a huge form, in a truly hideous bonnet, lunged at Sherlock's shoulders. Mrs. Culhane was back. Staggering from the impact of her weight, Sherlock very nearly fell. Alas, he lost his grip on his prisoner, who at once took to his heels. I tried to detach Mrs. Culhane from my brother. She swatted me aside and sent me sprawling, but someone nearly as large as she grasped her flailing arm. Mycroft wrenched her off Sherlock, hurling her to her adipose posterior into the muck. I failed to enjoy this scene to my satisfaction at the time, because my concern was all for another faint cry. From the ground, kneeling beside the lady, I grasped her filthy hand in mine. Your Grace? Looking up at me, she nodded, and indeed even layers of grime could not obscure the flower-like beauty of her face. Although her glorious tresses were gone, leaving only an inch or two of stubble, stiffened by mud. It was Duchessa Blanchefleur. Help me, she whispered. We have come to do so, I assured her. But what? Are you injured? She shook her head. Toby, that paragon of trackers, according to the sign of the 4, came over and sniffed the Duchessa without showing the slightest hint of recognition. Are you weak? I asked the lady. Starved? No, not at all. Her lovely eyes widened, quite earnest. The paupers share their bread with me. The poorest of the poor in rags have pity on me. Just the same, I produced one of the strengthening sugar candies I always carry with me and placed it into her mouth, as Sherlock crouched at her other side, and Mycroft. Of Mrs. Culhane I saw nothing more. Apparently she had wisely retreated. But I want to go home. Lady Blanchefleur said quite simply, her words rendered pitiful only by her circumstances. "Will you take me home?" "We have come here for that purpose," said Sherlock. "May I assist you to sit up, my lady?" "Oh, no. No, I cannot sit up, nor can I stand, not by myself." She seemed a trifle breathless, as if shocked, as if sitting up or standing by herself would be indecent. "Unless someone could possibly fetch me—" Her words trailed away, and one could hear the blushing embarrassment in them. Averting her eyes from my brother, she gazed at me imploringly. "What?" asked Mycroft with far less than his usual gruffness. "What on earth is it that you need?" Wincing away from his questions, he whispered to me, "I tried to crawl, but even that was impossible. My waist—" And I remembered the diabolical corset I had seen hanging in Mrs. Culhane's shop. Blanchefleur had worn such a corset, her ladies had told me, since childhood. Indeed, I looked down upon the woman with the waist of a 6-year-old. Never before had I actually seen proof, but Mum had read to me from her dress reform journals of such mutilation. "Ye gods with bunions!" I exploded, suddenly, furious, although not at the unfortunate lady. I glared across her supine, shorn, and deformed body at my brothers. "I am sure she was sent to the very best boarding schools, Mycroft. What on earth? Her poor waist, compressed to the extent that her personage has—" I could not remember the word atrophied, and this made me even angrier. "All her strength given up to fashion, so that now she cannot sit, stand, or walk unless she is encased in one of those infernal devices of torture." Lady Blanchefleur began silently, but with eloquence, to weep. I have never seen Mycroft look so bewildered, but Sherlock, because he had at one time been subjected to quite a lecture by Florence Nightingale, did understand. Indeed, as one might expect, Sherlock took charge. "Hush, Enola, you've said enough. Might we borrow your cloak?" Biting my lip to silence my anger, I stood up, took off the much besmirched cloak, and handed it to him. "Now, your grace, we shall carry you. Mycroft, lift your shoulders, please. There, you see? I told you our undertaking tonight would require 2 strong men." Actually, once he had the Duchessa wrapped in my cloak for modesty, Sherlock carried her easily by himself. She was such a frail thing, her weight so slight. He turned westward, towards the city. But after we had trampled through the slums for quite a distance without seeing a cab, indeed it would have been difficult to find one anywhere in London, as the hour was perhaps 4 in the morning, he turned to Mycroft and said, almost as if they were 2 boys again playing a game, "Your turn. Here." He handed the lady over to Mycroft, and to Mycroft's credit he bore the burden gently and steadily. Still we saw no cab or any sign of any form of transportation. Certainly the East End streets were not deserted, not in summertime, but the drunkards and other denizens, sneak thieves and round-the-corner sallies, stayed far from us. 2 grim, aristocratic men carrying what appeared to be a lifeless body, as I trailed along, quite a sight, I am sure, in my muddy yellow dress with my face, hands, and hair in a mess, carrying a carpet-bag, and leading a spotted spaniel by a leash. Mycroft eventually handed Duchessa Blanchefleur back to Sherlock, and so we continued for miles, as they took turns carrying her. During this entire protracted ordeal, both of my brothers remained almost completely silent, and Sherlock, in the lead, as usual, seemed to have forgotten that I existed. But Mycroft walked next to me, and I felt him stealing frequent glances at me. At last he spoke. "Enola, when earlier this evening Sherlock told me that all would become plain, was he speaking of you?" Actually, I had no idea why Sherlock had insisted on bringing Mycroft along, therefore I had no answer for Mycroft's question. But as Mycroft seriously awaited my reply, sudden, irrepressible laughter burst from me. "Indeed," I cried, "considering the condition of my hair, my face, and my personage right now, seldom has a woman been plainer." I heard Sherlock chuckle, but Mycroft gazed at me, more solemn than ever, and in that moment, to my astonishment, I felt that I rather liked him. "Exactly," he said. "Last summer I met a rather spoilt yet neglected stick of a girl, or so it seemed to me. Yet now I see an extraordinary woman. All is not plain. Not at all, for you are still but 14 years of age." 15, I replied pensively. "In a few days." I had been thinking of my approaching birthday, anniversary with no great joy. Already owlish, Mycroft's eyes widened yet more. "Really?" "Truly," exclaimed Sherlock at the same time. "Has it been a year already?" "Almost a year since Mum ran off with the Gypsies? Yes." Saying it made me remember the message from Mum that I carried, still unread, over my heart, and I felt a familiar ache, somewhat intensified under the circumstances. "I still cannot believe our mother would," Mycroft began, for apparently Sherlock had discussed gypsies with him. But Sherlock silenced him. "I coerced you into accompanying us tonight, Mycroft," he told his other brother quietly, "so that you would come to know Enola better, see her in action, and perhaps derive some insight from the experience." Meaningfully he halted, turned to Mycroft, and handed over to him the helpless and apparently fainting Duchessa Blanchefleur. "Have you?" "This is an exceedingly inconvenient time for conversation," Mycroft growled. "Quite," agreed Sherlock placidly, as Mycroft trudged forward with his burden, and we walked beside him. "At your earliest convenience, then." Mycroft said something rather naughty, although justifiable under the circumstances, which I shall not repeat. Silently, we slogged onward. It's the end of chapter 18. Alrighty. Almost there. I don't think this has anything after the last chapter. We've got 2 more chapters. Chapter the 19th. Dawn bleached the sky behind the chimney pots by the time we finally reached Aldgate Pump, one of London's huge hygienic monstrosities, unofficial marker that we were passing out of the unwashed East End and into City proper. At the adjacent cab stand, a few yawning drivers had arrived, and Sherlock was able to secure a 4-wheeler. As he laid Duchessa Blanchefleur gently upon one of the seats, she stirred and opened her eyes. "It is as I have always thought," she murmured. "At their hearts people are truly kind. Thank you." "You deserve all kindness," I told her as I gave her another candy. Nor did Sherlock disabuse her by reminding her of the kindness of Mrs. Culhane or Squeaky. Instead, he turned to me. "Enola, might I ask you how you came to be involved in this affair?" "Of course you may ask," I told him, and although we were all very weary from the night's labors, I hoped my smile expressed my fondness for him. But I declined to answer. He raised his eyes heavenward briefly before he spoke again. Excuse me. "Let me rephrase. You are known to Duque Luis del Campo and his household?" "I am known to them as a concerned gentlewoman." "Then I think it would be less distressing to the household if you and you alone were to see Duchessa Blanchefleur home." "Leaving masculine eyes out of the matter, you mean?" "Exactly. Wait a minute." Taking Toby's leash from me and handing it to Mycroft, he strode to Aldgate Pump, producing a handkerchief, not edged with lace. His was the large masculine item. Sopped it with water, came back to me and began scrubbing my face as if I were a child. Exceedingly fatigued, and also caught off guard, I stood like a department store dummy for a few minutes before I reacted, pushing him away and taking the handkerchief to finish the job myself, washing mud and muck off my face and hands. "Not too bad," Sherlock said doubtfully once I had put on my wig and my hat to cover my dreadful hair. "Do you need your birthmark?" "No." "Until we meet again, then?" "Yes. Once this errand is done, I quite intend to sleep until tomorrow." I tossed my carpetbag into the cab, but as I placed my foot on the step to follow it, Mycroft spoke for the first time. "Wait!" Poor Mycroft, I had almost forgotten he was there. With hasty compunction, I turned to him. All of his usual pomposity and loquacity had vanished during the rigors of the night. He spoke with gruff but almost childlike simplicity. "When shall we see you?" So warm was the unexpected surge of affection I had felt for him that I had to remind myself that he had made no promises and I could not trust him. After a moment I replied, "I don't know. I will be in touch. I promise." "Kindly notice that I have not summoned a constable to take you in hand," he replied with some return of his usual testiness. "I have noticed, believe me," I told him earnestly. "Such being the case, why can we not agree? I am quite exhausted, Mycroft. Unable to reason, I dare not agree to anything." Suddenly, Sherlock spoke up with incoherence most unusual for him. "Enola! Your birthday!" I turned to him in genuine bewilderment. My birthday? What of it? Neither of them had ever concerned himself with my birthday. And both of them seemed to have lost all of their usual eloquence. As if he were having trouble completing a thought, Sherlock said, We should be together." "What for?" "All three of us," Mycroft said, just as laboriously. "Not to celebrate, certainly, the day that our mother had run away." "I cannot imagine either of you offering me cake or gifts. Why—" But I let the question incomplete, partly because it would have been cruel to make them say any more, partly because I myself could not at that time face my own befuddled emotions, and also because, odd for a logician's daughter, I remembered what the gypsy woman had said to me, that I was fated to be forever alone, unless I chose to defy the fate. Together, all three of us. Or safety alone. The decision was mine. "Enola?" asked Mycroft. Far too tired to think it through, I trusted the impulse of my heart. I nodded. "Baker Street? Sherlock?" "Baker Street, by all means. At tea time. Bring the Skytails." That simply it was decided. The three of us would meet again on, not so much my birthday as the anniversary of Mum's disappearance, all three of us trying to decipher what had become of her. A bitter thought, but I said only, "Very well," and waved, and stepped into the cab to take Duchessa Blanchefleur home to Oakley Street. I pillowed her exceedingly dirty and pitifully cropped head in my lap whilst holding her hand. A few times during the journey she opened her eyes, but only to give me her angelic smile and close them again. When we reached the Duque's Moorish mansion, it was still very early, with only intermittent sleepy traffic on the street and pavements. Nevertheless, I knocked for the cabby to descend, then told him to pull around to the back of the Del Campo residence like a delivery van. Fewer eyes would see there, and I felt sure that Duque Louise Del Campo would prefer, as I did for different reasons, that details of Blanchefleur's whereabouts, whilst absent from her family, should be kept out of the newspapers. As we stopped by the kitchen door, a cook ran out, scolding, then screamed like a guinea hen when I opened the cab and she saw the scene within. "Fetch your master," I told her, "and Mary—" Heavens, I could not think of their names, only Mary of Magdala, of Bethany, of Nazareth, of Flowers, none of which would do. "Send down Duchessa Blanchefleur's ladies-in-waiting, and hurry, and be quiet about it," I added futilely, as she scuttled off squealing like a shoat. The Duque appeared first. In the days to follow I drew many amusing sketches of that noble gentleman, his black hair all in pollywogs, rushing out in his nightgown, with his bony ankles and bare feet protruding beneath the hem. True to his hot-blooded nature, he had not paused even to put on slippers or a dressing gown. Then came Mary in Chanel and Mary in flannel. It's spelled like this. I don't know if that, it's not Chanel like the perfume. There you go. And Mary in flannel. I still could not remember Hambledon or Thorocrumb, or which was which, nor did it matter. They shrieked and wept. The Duque, to his everlasting credit in my mind, verily kissed his wife again and again upon her thoroughly besmirched face. However, it did seem to me that more practical steps were in order. Paying the cabby, I suggested to the Duque that he should take his wife inside, and he gathered her up, and did so, bellowing at the cook to summon the doctor, whilst the two Marys and I trailed after him. He placed her, muck and all, on a fainting sofa in the parlour. Never before had I seen that item of furniture used for its stated purpose. Whilst the Marys ran for smelling salts, hot water, and heaven knew what else, the Duque flung himself about the room in operatic paroxysms of joy at his wife's recovery, wrath at the perpetrators of her disappearance and her pitiful state, prayerful gratitude, impatience for the doctor to arrive, indeed every possible reaction, only occasionally and incidentally including demands for explanations. So eventually, as the Marys took over and the physician hurried in, I was able to excuse myself, having given only the most vague of accounts implying that Dr. Ragaston had located the lady, but in his masculine delicacy he preferred not to be credited in any way or mentioned in the affair. Duque Louise himself seemed overtaken by similar delicacy, although this might have been more of the social variety. He asked me nothing of what I had seen or where Blanchefleur had been, and I felt sure that when he contacted Scotland Yard he would report only that his wife had been found, and refuse any further cooperation. A headline would appear in the newspapers hailing the return of the Duchessa, but the text that followed would consist mostly of creative speculation. Sherlock Holmes, like Dr. Ragaston, would receive no credit in the affair. Nor would my brother wish for any recognition. I thought, as a different cab, innocent of mud, drove me away. In Dr. Watson's accounts of the great detective's adventures, Sherlock Holmes often declined to be mentioned in the solution of a case. Surely neither he nor Mycroft desired plaudits in this one. Sherlock. Mycroft. I had brothers. How odd it felt. How old-fashioned. How comfortable. I did not bother stopping my cab at the wrong place, ducking through underground stations, any of my usual precautions. In this case, I had been followed by... I did not bother stopping my cab at the wrong place, ducking through underground stations, any of my usual precautions in case I had been followed by either of the aforementioned brothers. I was simply too tired to bother. Also, to my muted surprise, I realized that, should they find out where I lived, I no longer cared. In short, I had the cabbie take me directly to the Professional Women's Club. Once there, I staggered in by the side door so as not to make a mess of the receiving room's carpeting, heaved myself upstairs to my room, ordered a bath and some buttered toast, partook of both, sent down my laundry, and, at about the time most folk were commencing their day's work, I collapsed into bed, for I blush not to say it myself, a very well-earned nap. That's the end of chapter 19. I'm sorry, I misspoke earlier. Now we have 2 chapters left. So, oh hey, Riddy, welcome! Glad to have you. I'm sorry that No, it's okay. You're welcome to lurk anytime. I'm glad you're here. I think Summer might be lurking too. If you are, welcome. Thanks for being here. Just finishing up this book. Glad to have you. Glad to have you listening. Chapter the 20th. Sleeping during the day tends to induce confusion. I awoke that afternoon feeling quite young and wretched, sure that I'd slept right through my birthday and therefore received no worthwhile presents, on top of which Mum had gone missing. I had hunted for her through the woods of Ferndale in the rain, and now my knickerbockers were wet, but I needed to meet my brothers at the train station. My brothers! No wonder I felt so frantic. I had never met them. I wanted to find my mother, but also I did very much want them to like me. I must not wear knickerbockers. My hair dreadfully needed washing. All my white frocks had grass stains on them. And what if I couldn't make it to the train station in time on my bicycle? Bicycle? Absurd. I hadn't ridden a bicycle in a year. I had abandoned mine in a copse of trees on a hill overlooking the country town of Belvedere during my own flight to London. Sitting up, recognizing my room in the Professional Women's Club, realizing that my birthday was not until tomorrow, but I must indeed meet my brothers, in a sense, for the first time, wearing a nice frock. Then I saw that I had left a brown impression on my pillowcase. My hair did dreadfully need washing. How peculiar, the parallels between last year and this. As I got out of bed to ring the bell for service, I still felt befuddled. As if I had slept late and missed seeing my mother depart, I must find her, notify the constabulary in Kindford village. I must at once take my bicycle. Bicycle? There it was again. Something tapping me on the shoulder. Mum had taken quite a bit of trouble to teach me to ride a bicycle, now that I thought about it, and that was extraordinary, for Mum had not generally troubled herself much about me. You will do very well on your own, Enola, had been her usual daily dismissal. Evidently the ability to ride a bicycle had been important to Mum, suffragist and the reformer that she was. Indeed, standing on a cold floor barefoot in my nightgown and recalling various conversations, I realized that a bicycle was a symbol of sorts for Mum's belief. A bicycle offered freedom of movement to females, whilst defiantly flaunting the fact that they were indeed bipeds, just like those who wore trousers. Very likely, Mum assumed that I had my bicycle here with me in London. She probably thought that I had ridden it here. Oh, my wheeling stars! I felt weak, excusably so considering how little I had eaten lately, and sat down on the bed, clutching its edge with both hands. The bicycle. The sky-tails. Undeniably, a bicycle incorporated various tubular, cylindrical parts of considerable size. Not only that, but it seemed to me, thinking of the many bicycles I had seen, it seemed that they were all made of metallic cylinders of approximately the same dimensions. Certainly it was worth a try, but I simply could not deal with it yet. I needed to wash my hair, quite a bother, as it required a fire in the hearth, numerous warm towels, and the assistance of a maid, and it needed to dry, which took hours. Also, the pain and commotion in my middle nearly bent me double. I badly needed something restorative to eat. I would be fully occupied for what remained of the day, and I had no idea where to find a bicycle other than perhaps by stopping a messenger boy in the street. However, after a soothing soup, some heavenly fresh-baked bread, hot shepherd's pie, and a cup of divine tapioca custard, after taking dinner in my room, because my hair was not yet dry, I could better think what to do. I applied myself to ink, pen, and my best writing paper with the following result. My dear brother, you will find this an odd birthday request, I am sure, but it is of utmost importance not only to me, but to you and Mycroft. If you would be so good, I would like you to borrow or otherwise obtain several dwarf safety bicycles, such as the one I used to ride, so that I may attempt an experiment upon them at tea time. I know you will not fail me. Fondly, your seditious sister, Enola. This is the spelling, just so you can Google this definition if you want. I addressed this to Sherlock Holmes, but included no return address, and rather than trust a messenger, I simply delivered it myself, with my hair in a bun, large dark glasses on my nose, and wearing the nondescript hat and tweeds of a spinster, thereby attracting no unpleasant attention on the underground. A danger at this late hour. Everyone was abed when I slipped my note through the slot in the door of 221 Baker Street. Sherlock would receive it in the morning. Thank you, Riddy. The morning of my 15th birthday, forsooth, and I spent most of the morning, indeed most of the day, in preparation for my birthday tea. I decided upon a fashionably cut, puffed shoulders indeed, gown of plum-colored nainsook, that is to say the very finest cotton, beautifully draped, suitable for summertime weather, yet as luxurious as silk, and I took a risk. Rather than wear my trusty wig, I asked one of the maids at the Professional Women's Club to help me with my own freshly laundered hair. A dowdy woman, rising to the challenge, she gave it no less than 500 strokes with a hairbrush, in an attempt to smooth it and render it glossy. Perversely, it chose instead to fly skyward in all directions, but she was not intimidated, and with the assistance of water and numerous hairpins, she tamed it into a very presentable chignon. Chignon. I don't ever remember how to pronounce that. With some discreet color added to my face, collar and undersleeves of ruffled white cotton appended to my plum nainsook frock, and golden yellow daylilies upon my hat and bodice, I was more satisfied than surprised upon checking myself in the standing full-length mirror, that I passed muster right down to the shine on my dove-colored button-top boots. Even Mycroft could find nothing less than ladylike in my appearance. This comforted me a little. My sentiments concerning today's meeting with Mycroft, taking tea, forsooth, were considerably confused and more than a little frightened. Recalling that bleached dawn and Mycroft's solemn, weary face, his fatigue shared with mine, my feelings, my thoughts about the gypsy's words, it all seemed nonsensical now. How affectionately and impulsively I had agreed to meet him. Ludicrous that I should go like a lamb to risk my freedom. I had given my word, and I would keep it, but still, gypsy superstition, really, Enola, I chided myself as I found the dove-colored gloves that matched my boots, surveyed myself in the mirror one more time, sighed, then went down to hail a cab. Only my gloves kept me from biting my fingernails during the brief cab ride. But the instant we stopped at 221 Baker Street, my thoughts were thoroughly diverted, for upon the pavement in front of my brother's lodging stood quite an impressive array of bicycles. Also upon the pavement stood my brothers, both of them, but they failed to seize my interest. The moment I had paid the cab driver, I turned to the bicycles, my gaze darting from one to the next. "Whatever is this about?" Mycroft demanded. I heard a shrug in Sherlock's voice as he replied, "Bicycles she wanted, and bicycles she shall have." "This one!" I exclaimed belatedly, raising my head to greet my brothers. "Hello, Mycroft. Hello, Sherlock." I grasped the bicycle's handlebars, rolling it forward for better access, then began to strip off my gloves and get to work. "This particular one looks very much like the ones Mum and I used to ride. Not that any of them vary greatly in dimensions, but I think we should try this one first." I drew Mum's coded message, the Skytail, from my bosom, the feminine carry-all that was considered safer than pockets. "Ah, there is method in her madness!" With a great good spirit, Sherlock echoed the phrase that had often been applied to himself. I failed to catch Mycroft's reply, for I was all intent on the bicycle. The long column that ran down from the handlebars towards the pedals seemed most likely for a skytail. However, after winding one of my strips of paper a few times around it, I saw that it was not going to give satisfaction. I muttered something rather naughty. "Really, my dear sister," said a masculine voice near my shoulder, causing me to startle most provokingly. I had not noticed that my brothers had walked over to stand beside me. My irritation subsided instantly, however, as I realized with amazement that the words gentle and teasing had been spoken not by Sherlock, but by Mycroft. Indeed, Sherlock sounded the more pompous of the two today. "Apply an analysis of our mother's character to the problem," he pontificated. "One would think that, to her, the most important part of a bicycle would be the mechanism upon which the rider exerts control." As my back was turned to him, I allowed myself to roll my eyes before shifting my attention to the thick metal column running up the handlebars. Quickly, I forgot to be annoyed with Sherlock, for as I wound the skytail, spiraling up that cylinder, I saw words beginning to form. But I could complete the message only by winding the paper to its end, just beneath the bicycle's handlebars, and even then I could only read a few lines. "Cannot be a mother without first being a person. Family, husband, and children should not be allowed." As is so often the case, to steal a woman's selfhood and her dreams, I considered that, if I were not true to myself, then all the mothering I could give you would have been falsehood. My brother Sherlock, crouching on the other side of the bicycle, continued reading around the curve of the cylinder. "I cannot be other than who I am, but perhaps I should not have been a mother. Such being the case, I find it no surprise that your brothers are both bachelors." "Heavens," Mycroft said, "quite an epistle, and I believe we have got hold of it by the middle. There are 3 other strips of paper, are there not? Might we attempt to ascertain which comes first?" "We might indeed," Sherlock agreed, "and if you would be so good as to send the page boy for a pencil and paper, you can copy it down as Enola and I read it out to you." Thus my birthday tea began on the pavement outside 221 Baker Street. I will spare the gentle reader the full details of our fumblings and experimentations with the 4 strips of paper. I must say that I felt an unusual contentment, even joy of a sort, simply working together with my brothers toward a shared goal. My happiness, however, took a rude blow when we finally located the beginning of Mum's message. "My dearest Enola, if you have received this communication, it means that I am deceased." Chapter the 21st. I was reading aloud at the time, and my voice faltered. Utter silence fell between the 3 of us, although the traffic in the street rumbled as loud as ever. Neither Sherlock nor Mycroft seemed to know what to say, or perhaps they were waiting for me, dearest Enola, to speak. "Of course," I said finally. "The charcoal markings on the envelope, the borders and encirclement and the guardian eyes, the gypsies put them there to protect themselves whilst they delivered the message." "In their superstition they needed to ward off the shadow of death," said Mycroft gruffly. "Quite." "Enola," said Sherlock, "I am sorry." "For what?" Through the bicycle spokes I made what I hoped was a comical face at him. "Happy birthday to me." Sherlock averted his eyes. "Billy," he called sharply to the boy in buttons, "you may return the rest of these bicycles to their owners." Whilst he did so, we continued. Again, to spare the gentle reader, I will not describe our continuing struggles with Mum's farewell missive. Here it is, as Mycroft eventually transcribed it, in its entirety. "My dearest Enola, if you have received this communication, it means that I am deceased. Abrupt, and indeed cruel as those words may sound, I refuse to soften them by saying I have passed on to a better place, or any of the usual platitudes. You know that as an educated woman and a free thinker, I do not believe in a hereafter. One reason I have so ardently championed women's rights is because I am convinced that one's life is the only life one shall have, and one should live it to the fullest. It was for this reason that I left you. Yes, I will say it, abandoned you. Do please believe I feel appropriate guilt. In such a callous manner. I meant to delay a year or 2 longer, but I could feel a very likely cancerous growth in my abdomen, enlarging at an alarming rate, and I realized I had no time to wait. Enola, you have always been wise beyond your years, so I hope you will be able to see that one cannot be a mother without first being a person. Family, husband, and children should not be allowed, as is so often the case, to steal a woman's selfhood and her dreams. I considered that, if I were not true to myself, then all the mothering I could give you would have been falsehood. I cannot be other than who I am, but perhaps I should not have been a mother. Such being the case, I find it no surprise that your brothers are both bachelors. Perhaps you also will decline to beget children, and perhaps that would be for the best. In any event, all of my life, since I was a child, I have longed to experience the simple freedom of the gypsies. I love their colorful, comfortable dress, their singing violins, their head-tossing horses, their laughter, their flaunting of foolish rules. Their thievery, as you may well imagine, troubles me not at all, being in the same rebellious spirit as my own. For surely you know that I was larcenous in the eyes of the law when I left you. Doing so, I selfishly pursued my dream, but I offer the feeble excuse that I was also conscious of you, wishing to spare you the melodrama of deathbed attendants, black crape, and all of society's deplorable onerous rituals of mourning. Also, I wished to avoid the fate of your poor father, a churchyard funeral on a slab of stone. I wanted only to be free. Free in my life, what remained of it, and free in death. How ironic, then, that I, a rationalist, have chosen to live out my days with people who fervidly believe in all sorts of nonsense, from palmistry to the afterlife. But despite their superstitions, nothing can lessen my affection for the gypsies. They treat me almost as a deity. I lie now in a tent erected especially for me because I am dying. I am cared for tenderly, even though those who touch me must undergo ritual cleansing afterward. New shoes are being made for me, and new clothing, so that I will have everything I need in order to be dead. Amulets and coins will be sprinkled on me when they lay me in the ground, and doubtless they will bury my paintbrushes with me. If I had horses or a caravan of my own, the caravan would be burned and the horses killed to go with me. And as I do not, they will make wreaths shaped like horses and a caravan, and lay those upon my grave, which will be located wherever the wind has blown them at the time. After which, within a day, they will leave me behind, go on their wandering way, and go on singing. To me, for reasons I cannot explain, this all seems quite beautiful. To you, perhaps not. I try to look at what I have done from your point of view, and I realize I have surely caused you pain. Very likely you have wondered about my feelings for you as a mother. I myself have questioned whether I have given you all of the nurture that I could. Thankfully, the answer is yes. I loved you as well as I am able, being the person I am. The paradox that a different mother would likely have given you warmer love. The paradox is that a different mother would have likely given you warmer love. But if you were the daughter of a different mother, then you would not be Enola. Enola Eudora Hadassah Holmes, my daughter of whom I am justifiably proud. I write this to you because I owe you truth. To your brothers I owe nothing. Yet I rejoice in their accomplishments, and I hope that should the time come when it is possible, you will share the contents of this letter with them. I intentionally include no date. I desire no anniversary remembrance of my death. It has been said that we live on in the memories of those we leave behind, with no desire to live on in any sense of the phrase, but trusting that you will not think too badly of me. Your mother, Eudora Verney Holmes. Our reactions to this epistolary event were interestingly various. Sherlock suddenly decided that he must himself return the remaining bicycle to its owner, and off he went, riding upon it, whilst Mycroft escorted me upstairs, puffing and very red in the face, then went down again, roaring for tea. As for me, I suppose I would not have been human had I not shed a few tears, especially when Reginald Colley came bounding to meet me, his whole-hearted, selfless affection in such contrast. I slumped on a sofa. The dog leapt to my side, and I laid my face against his furry neck and wept. If only my mother had been more like a dog. The absurdity of which thought almost made me laugh amidst my tears. Now really, Enola, I chided myself, sitting up to blow my nose, truly I owed a great deal to my mother, and as she hoped I did not think too badly of her. By being herself, suffragist and troublemaker Eudora Holmes, she had given me the courage of her example to be myself, Enola. Returning to find me wet-eyed, Mycroft rumbled a series of unintelligible tisking sounds and began to hunt in his pockets, but I was able to smile and tell him, "For a change, I have my own handkerchief," holding up a dainty one embroidered with violets. "All but useless," he grumbled. "I think it has served its purpose." I no longer felt much inclined to weep. Rather, I marveled to find myself sitting in the same room with my brother Mycroft without terror. I was astonished to see him obviously ill at ease, as I regarded him with fond amusement. Where is Sherlock, and where is the confounded tea? He complained. Whatever would we do without tea? It arrived. Mycroft poured. He offered me a plate of cake. Birthday cake? And as I took a slice, he said suddenly, Enola, I think it is within my power to make your birthday a bit happier after all. You already have, I said. Crossly he responded, Let me speak. First, I am sorry. No need, I cried. Do please be silent. I am sorry I ever heard of or spoke the words girls' boarding school, and given what I have lately learned, I no longer harbor any desire to send you to any such place. Moreover, I regret that I have so underestimated you. When we first met, I thought of you as a child I must save from herself, a responsibility I must undertake, indeed a neglected waif to be rescued. Your response, although I have found it outrageous, has nevertheless proved me quite mistaken. He had spoken largely to the tea things, but suddenly he raised his piercing gaze, facing me directly from under his bristling eyebrows. I hope you understand that I meant no harm. Of course you meant no harm. You were trying to do what you perceived as your duty. I realized we were about to enter into a diplomatic negotiation. Mycroft still held legal power over me, still felt responsible for me, and Sherlock was nowhere nearby to save me should Mycroft choose to take me quite literally in hand. Yet, without mindfully knowing why, I felt not the least bit afraid. Mycroft nodded. What I still perceive as my duty, Enola. It is my responsibility to see that you live in a safe place. I lodge at the Professional Women's Club, I told him, feeling sure it was no longer necessary to hide from him my whereabouts, although I still could not have said why. His eyebrows shot up in amazed approval. Nowhere in London could you be safer. But the expense! By now the money our dear but devious mother provided for you. I invested some of it in a boarding house, I told him, and the rents quite suffice for my needs. Good heavens! He exclaimed, whilst just as explosively Reginald Colley barked and leapt about as our brother walked in. Sherlock, did you hear that? Of course Sherlock could not have heard any of it. With heavy momentum, rather like a mill wheel, Mycroft turned to him. She lodges at the Women's Club. She owns a boarding house and lives off the rents. Why should you be surprised, my dear Mycroft? Dropping into a chair as if the day's events had wearied him, Sherlock poured himself some tea. You expected such competence. Indeed, you are quite right in what you have been telling me all along. What do you mean? You hypothesized that she was in the business of finding missing persons. Sitting back with a cup in hand, Sherlock turned to me with a quizzical look. The boarding house you own, Enola, would it by any chance include the office of one Dr. Ragaston, scientific Purgatorian? I am afraid my smile deserted me. How long have you known? Only since I went to inquire of Duque Luis del Campo whether his wife was feeling better, and he credited Dr. Ragaston with finding her. Sherlock seemed to find his tea remarkably invigorating, for now his eyes sparkled and his voice swelled, vibrant, as he said, The upstart girl is my competition, Mycroft. Because he could not follow, Mycroft responded peevishly, Sherlock, do please present your thoughts in some sensible order. But Sherlock had turned to me. Ivy Michelle worked as Dr. Ragaston's assistant? I sighed. No, merely as his secretary. I have since promoted myself to assistant under another name. Catching the conversational tiger by the tail at last, Mycroft sat up and ogled me. You invented this Dr. Ragaston? Exactly. So that you could devote yourself to finding missing persons? For a moment I could not reply. There seemed to be a warm obstruction in my throat. Both pairs of brotherly eyes were fixed on me, each exhibiting the same earnest desire to understand this strange creature, their sister, and in that moment I realized why I was no longer afraid of them. They cared for me, and I for them. How delightful, how filling, how sweet was this knowledge, better than any birthday cake ever. It enabled me to confide in them. Yes, missing persons and things. I meant at first to find Mum, but I kept putting it off. Wise, Mycroft said with a nod. One must know oneself, said Sherlock softly. How much one can take upon oneself, what one can bear. For a moment we all sat quite silent, and I dare say we were all three thinking of our mother, whom we loved, I suppose, as well as we were able, being the persons we were. Mycroft was first to rouse himself. So, Enola, he asked, what now? How can I best nurture you, as our dear departed mother would say, and keep you from getting yourself killed, but no longer incur your enmity? Sherlock says you would like some higher education. I would, I admitted, And I would like for a change to breathe air that has neither greasy texture nor any visible smoky color. You would like to take a holiday from London? For a while. Perhaps a few weeks in Ferndale. Perhaps a few weeks in Ferndale. Reginald Colley leaned warm against my skirt as absent-mindedly I stroked him. Also, I would very much like to call on Lady Cecily Alistair and see how she does, and whether we might be friends. Perhaps she might even consent to be a lady scholar along with me. A very good idea, said Mycroft, who knew something of my affection for Cecily. And after that? I will let you know. I need time to think. But my dear brothers, both of you. Sitting up, I engaged both pairs of hot grey eyes at once. Please allow yourself no illusions of my ever becoming a traditional woman. Finding the lost is my passion, my life's calling. I am a Purgatorian. Excellent, cried Sherlock. Scandalous, grumbled Mycroft in a resigned tone. Enola, Sherlock addressed me with as much emotion as one was ever likely to perceive in him. My cherished sister, I beg of you, be whatever you like. Selfishly, I have become quite addicted to you, your flair, the zest of never knowing. Truly, I cannot wait to see what on earth you will do next. The end. That's it, guys. I think it was very good. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being there. My Twitch friends, thank you for lurking. My YouTube listeners, thank you for being here. I very much enjoyed this. I really enjoyed having a reason to read some books for a change, and so I appreciate you guys being here. I believe, little brief announcement, that the next series I would like to read is going to be the Artemis Fowl series, which is also going to be, it's in the process of being made into a film. So I have read all of those, and I enjoy them very much. It's one of my favorite series. So I believe that will be my next undertaking, and likewise I will be reading them on Twitch, and then posting the streams to YouTube. So that's it. We wrapped up that series. It was very, very good. I highly recommend, if you enjoyed listening to them, and want to reread them, please do. You can definitely find them at your local library. They're usually in either the children's section or the young adult section. I'm a huge advocate for local libraries. That's where I grew up reading books. We couldn't afford books, so I got to read as many as I wanted for free. So I will call it a night. Thank you guys so much for being here. Thanks for sticking with me. If you've made it to this video, you've sat through the whole thing, congratulations. I will catch you guys later. Have a good evening. Have a good rest of your day. Good morning, whatever's going on. Just like Enola is not predictable, I will not be predictable. So I will not be announcing any time that I start streaming Artemis Fowl. But I do believe it will be sometime in the near future. If not this, I would estimate within the next 30 days. So if you want to catch that series with me, please, you'll find me right here. Twitch and YouTube are listed right there below. Have a good night. Thank you for being here. Thanks for being here, Riddy. And everybody else that's watching, have a good rest of your night, a good rest of your day, and I will catch you guys later.